This channel is part of the History Hit network.
What would Britain be without pictures like these? And without this family? But what would Britain be without this lady? 1.5 centuries ago, Queen Victoria founded an empire on which the sun never set. Never before had Britain been so mighty. This little lady survived 7 assassination attempts. She married a German prince, and most of her 9 children followed her example. But by the end of her life, Germany had become too powerful. There was a great war in the air, its outbreak a matter of years. The First World War was to become the cruelest slaughter ever seen, and at the same time, an absurd family feud. Victoria's dream of peace in a European family was shattered on her deathbed. Spring, 1819. A carriage rushes from the south coast of England to London. A British nobleman at the reins. He is a human wreck, a loser, but he is of royal blood. The Duke of Kent. He and his family lodge with German relatives as he can't afford to live in London. In the carriage, his very pregnant German spouse and her midwife. The hoped-for son has to be born in England, for with a bit of luck, he'll one day be King of England. On the 24th of May, 1819, the child is born in Kensington Palace near Hyde Park. A healthy baby girl, Alexandrina Victoria. Only a few days later, the midwife, Charlotte Siebold, is ordered to return to Germany as she's needed at home. A 4-week journey away, Coburg. In this castle, too, a child is born who's to play a vital role in Britain. A boy called Albert. 21 years later, his cousin in London, who's nearly the same age, will ask for his hand in marriage. The dream couple of the 19th century. Victoria spends her childhood at Kensington Palace. Her father dies early on in her life. From now on, Victoria is raised as a German. English will be only her second language.
She was entirely on her own, this is interesting. She was isolated from other children, and she never met anybody very much.
Until she turns 18, she has to sleep in her mother's room, as the adolescent Victoria enjoys glimpses of well-built men. The Duchess also fears an attempt on the life of the future Queen.
History Hit is a streaming platform that is just for history fans, with fantastic documentaries covering fascinating figures and moments in history from all over the world. We've got unrivaled access to the world's leading historians, with hundreds of documentaries featuring everything from Boudica to the British royal family. We're committed to bringing history fans award-winning documentaries and podcasts that you cannot find anywhere else. Sign up now for a free trial, and Real Royalty fans get 50% off their first 3 months. Just be sure to use code REALROYALTY at checkout.
The waltz is very fashionable, but not for Victoria. Too much physical contact with men. She begins to loathe her mother. the teenager starts to write her thoughts and feelings down. She is to keep a diary until the end of her life. "You may understand," she writes to her uncle, "that my feelings are pretty strong now that the season is returning. And I've been a very good child, not even wishing to come to town till now." Windsor Castle in 1838. The King, William IV, is terminally ill. In these rooms, great efforts are made to keep him alive until Victoria comes of age. A regency in the hands of Victoria's mother, whom he hates, must be avoided. He achieves his goal. The King dies at 2 o'clock in the morning, a few weeks after Victoria's 18th birthday. Victoria is woken immediately and addressed as "Your Majesty" for the first time. She promises, "I will be good." She is crowned at the age of 19. The new Queen herself commemorates the ceremony in a watercolour. Victoria's task is a difficult one. More than 100 years earlier, the House of Hanover brought progress to England, but has in the meantime lost its good reputation. The monarchy's image has been run down by weak kings. Victoria wants to give the crown back its shine. Victoria's favourite uncle, Leopold, advises her to marry in order to avoid false expectations. Sooner than she'd like, Prince Albert, her cousin from Coburg, is ordered to come to London for her inspection.
What happened was that Queen Victoria did not want to be bulldozed, didn't want to be pushed into this marriage. She had her own views, and the more they tried to push him onto her, the more she resented it.
All marriage is such a lottery. The happiness is always an exchange, she writes in her diary, and adds, though it might be a very happy one, still the poor woman is bodily and morally the husband's slave.
In the end, it was that they met. She was very taken by him. He was a very handsome man. He was charming. He had a great way with people. She found him a very sympathetic figure. And in the end, she simply fell in love with him.
Entry in her diary after the wedding night. "We didn't sleep much. He looked so beautiful in his shirt only." Victoria tells her advisor Melbourne the next morning about a very satisfying and confusing night. Coburg is still the ancestral seat of Albert's family. Beyond a dense forest lies Kallenberg, the castle now owned by his descendants. Here comes the head of the family. Prince Andreas was raised in the United States and is trying to translate his family's traditions into modern times. The prince and his forester will feed the deer and see if they're good for hunting yet. Nowadays, the Coburgs have no political power whatsoever. But 100 years ago, they occupied more thrones than any other aristocratic family. Bismarck referred to them mockingly as the stud of Europe.
Well, the family link, first of all, we were related directly to my great-great-grandmother, great-great-grandfather Albert. The values of these families, being liberal, being earnest, living up to things that you expect from other people, I think these are values to be proud of.
Albert's last pleasure before leaving for London. Hunting foxes and hares will remain one of his favourite pastimes in Britain too. A welcome change to the daily routine where language plays no part.
England at that time in the 1840s was an open country, a heaven for people who sought political asylum. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they were without prejudices against the nations on the continent. And when Victoria married Albert, there were a lot of questions. Hey, why does it have to be a German?
It was very difficult for him at the beginning because Queen Victoria didn't like the idea of sharing with him some of the affairs of state. She was very jealous.
Victoria is to be the boss in their private life too. Albert wants to go on a long honeymoon, but she rejects this roughly in a letter. 3 days, longer is out of the question. She is the queen. Albert feels neglected. His wife prefers to listen to her governess and confidant, the German Louise Leysen.
The Queen felt that she would lose her authority if she shared her position with him. And she was backed up in this by Baroness Leysen, who felt that she also would lose her influence over Victoria.
Albert plots and schemes behind the Queen's back. He wants to send Leysen back to Germany. Victoria is furious, but finally, Albert gets his way.
And after that, the relations between Albert and Victoria were much, much calmer, and he became, to all intents and purposes, a co-monarch.
Albert's strongest weapon is Victoria's great desire to have him near. Their love life prospers. Only 9 months after their wedding night, the midwife is called. The Queen expects a male heir to the throne. If she has a daughter, the child will be drowned, she once writes to Uncle Leopold, and states in her diary that children in their first 6 months are little more than plants. It is a girl. Never mind, she promises Albert, next time it will be a prince.
She hated childbirth. She hated all those pregnancies. And don't forget, she had 9 children. And she only really liked, she didn't like babies. She liked children when they were 3 or 4 years old, and they become little characters, little people.
Buckingham Palace, the changing of the guards. Then, as now, the most popular royal spectacle in London. The public part of an expensive show for which Britain is being envied by the whole world. Loss of privacy is the price the royal family has to pay as representatives of the constitutional monarchy. For Victoria, a serious problem.
The thing was that she and Prince Albert liked a very cosy, informal life. And they certainly didn't get it at Buckingham Palace or at Windsor.
They seek refuge in the countryside, the picturesque Isle of Wight on England's south coast. Norris Castle is where Victoria used to spend holidays with her mother. She wants to buy the castle with the 12-foot thick walls, but the owner asks too high a price. The royal couple buy the cheaper land nearby. Albert builds his queen a dream palace in the Italian style, Osborne House. He himself draws the plans and imports materials from all over Europe. Everything is well planned. Albert oversees even the smallest details personally, and Victoria begins to learn to control her sometimes passionate feelings. He becomes her best advisor, even on matters of government.
Prince Albert's writing room. And here we can imagine the Prince Consort sitting at his desk, toiling away on his massive correspondence, as well as all the other multifarious projects that he was involved with. He was an incredibly busy chap. He graduated from being, as he called himself, just the husband in the house, to being the master of the house. And here we can see in the Queen's sitting room, very symbolic, in the centre of the room, these two working desks, which the Queen and the Prince Consort would have worked at side by side. The masses of correspondence that they would have got through, the amount of letter writing and writing generally that they both did was phenomenal. And it was really from this room at Osborne House that the British Empire was controlled.
Sharing bed and desk, they create a new dynasty, which only 2 generations later will embrace all the important royal houses in Europe. Vicky is to become the wife of the German emperor. Her resemblance to Albert makes her Victoria's favourite child. The longed-for prince, Edward, he is to become King of England, in spite of all the trouble he causes the Queen. Alice, the future Princess of Hessen, her daughter is to marry the Russian Tsar. Alfred, future regent of Saxe-Coburg. And Helena, future Princess of Schleswig-Holstein. Louise, the only one of the 9 children to marry a British subject. And Arthur, his daughter is to become Queen of Sweden. Leopold will marry a princess of Waldeck-Pyrmont. He is to die young, of haemophilia. Beatrice, future Princess of Battenberg. She will burn her mother's diaries after her death. This happy family gives an example for an entire era. Queen Victoria will never be this content again.
A favourite pastime was swimming in the bay here at Osborne. And here we are standing in front of this incredible contraption here. Was the Queen's bathing machine. And it's basically a large changing room, and it would have been winched from the back. It would have run along these grooves here, these sort of almost like railway tracks, I suppose. Here we've got the changing room, and the Queen would have changed from her day clothes into her bathing costume.
The bathing machine, a Victorian invention, bringing into line the demands of morality and the desire for pleasure. The common people step into the water unshielded. The Queen, on the other hand, must not be observed. Rail tracks lead right into the water.
She would change, the machine would have been lowered into the water, the steps would have been submerged in water, so that she would have been able to come out underneath the canopy, walk down the steps into the sea, completely unseen.
Relics of the royal bathing machine can still be seen today. Stone rail tracks discovered on the Queen's private beach. Albert builds a chalet with a vegetable garden for his children. They sell the fruit to relatives so as to learn how to handle money. He also teaches them strategy and tactics.
It's a fort that was built in the 1850s for the royal children. And it's here that I suppose the children and grandchildren would have indulged in war games, which perhaps didn't augur too well for the future. So perhaps it wasn't a terribly good idea, but it must have been an incredibly exciting place for children to play.
The military is held in high esteem. The wounds of the Napoleonic Wars have not yet healed in Britain. Victoria intends to normalise relations with the former enemy, France. She meets Napoleon III, is taken by his charm, and even flirts with him. The two countries are finally united fighting the Russian Tsar. The Crimean War from 1853 to 1856.
The Crimean War was a turning point in history. For the first time in centuries, England and France were united. And this was also due to the good understanding between Queen Victoria and Louis Napoleon of France.
There is also a technical revolution going on in the 19th century. People experience huge changes in the world in just one generation. The most spectacular innovation is the railway, an English invention.
England in the 1840s was the motherland of the railways. It was also a significant effect that under her reign, travel became something democratic. Up till that time, it was impossible for the average people to leave their town or their village, but the railroad was a step to democratization of traveling.
But there was also opposition to progress. Some churchmen saw in the new trains instruments of the devil. Physicians warned about the dangers to health generated by travelling 20 miles per hour.
Victoria immensely enjoyed traveling by train. Albert was a bit different. He once complained to the conductor about the velocity of the car.
At the forefront of England's progress, Darwin, Stanley, Livingstone. Their names are world famous even today. They research the unknown parts of the world and the secrets of human origin. Victoria shows a great interest in the missionary David Livingstone. Taking great risks, he crosses Africa's jungles and follows the hitherto unexplored Zambezi River. In 1855, Livingstone discovers some gigantic waterfalls. In honour of his queen, he calls them the Victoria Falls. The Queen is flattered and requires a personal report from Livingstone. These adventurous expeditions give way to the Empire. The first to come are scientists, followed by salesmen, followed by soldiers, the foundation of modern imperialism. Progress takes huge strides. No other country industrializes as completely and rapidly as Britain. But there is a high price to pay. Exploitation, great poverty, and the suffering of millions.
Before the Industrial Revolution happened, people used to work on the land. And although they may have been poor, they at least were able to make a living. They could kill a goat, they could get eggs, they could live. But when they were taken and made to work in factories, it was really slave labor. They were paid virtually nothing.
Many work up to 16 hours a day, and they're happy doing so. The alternative is misery. Parts of England have unemployment rates of up to 90%. Children often find work easily, mostly in mines. They are small and are paid far less than grown-ups. The law against child labour does exist on paper, but will not be applied for years to come. Victoria and her family live far removed from this reality. The Queen asks her government regularly about the welfare of her people, but still strongly believes in the separation of the classes. Many are unable to make a living. Hundreds of thousands of people die during several years of crop failure in Ireland. The people are becoming dissatisfied, amongst other things, with their Queen. There are 7 assassination attempts on the Queen's life. Victoria is never injured and even tempts fate by choosing to drive through London in an open carriage. This bravery makes her more popular than ever. According to court and press, all the assassins are mentally ill. Albert too is to gain a reputation in his own right. He creates his own greatest monument, the first world exhibition in history. The press is opposed to the project. The inhabitants of London refuse to see why their beautiful Hyde Park should be ruined by the exhibition. But Albert gets his way.
The World Exhibition of 1851 was a magnificent event. It was a showcase of contemporary culture, contemporary technology.
The doors open on the 1st of May, 1851. All important countries and cultures show their achievements. Up to 700,000 visitors attend the opening weekend. Such an event has never taken place before. The press is full of praise, and the Queen is very proud of Albert.
It was a breakthrough for Albert. He had planned this event, he had almost ruined his health in planning it, and he gained widespread respect after the exhibition closed in fall 1851.
It's a most impressive construction, the Crystal Palace. Due to a devastating fire, this masterpiece of early glass architecture did not outlive the exhibition. When the exhibition closes after 5 months at a great profit, 6 million people have been to see it.
So gut, wollen wir uns doch mal betrachten, was die Wildschweine für einen Schaden gemacht haben letzte Nacht.
The German prince and his forester inspect the damage done by wild boar the previous night. For Prince Andreas of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, Albert's German descendant, aristocratic tasks are not always easy to deal with. Old hunting privileges can be a burden today. Last night, some wild boar had done damage to a meadow next to the prince's property. The prince's forester is worried about compensation claims by the farmer who owns the land. Money is always a problem. And it's the same story with Schloss Kallenberg, a fairy tale castle. But nobody talks about running costs in fairy tales. The keeper of the prince's archive allows us a glimpse behind the scenes. This old furniture has seen better days. The state of Bavaria has agreed to finance a large part of the castle's renovation. In return, the prince is obliged to open the house to the public as a museum for 30 years to come. This is how it used to look, and with the help of Bavaria's government, it might soon be a music room again. A masterpiece on the upper floor is the open fireplace made of Delft tiles, some of which strangely disappeared during the last century. Sometimes the prince is given a surprise in his own castle. Dr. Jota, the prince's archivist, has come across some long-forgotten treasures of the Victorian past while looking through his stock. Today it is a box with some of Albert's baby clothes.
A box containing clothing worn by His Royal Highness Prince Consort when an infant.
Unbelievable. What's that you've got there? Yes, this must contain things belonging to Victoria. You see the initials VR. Victoria Regina.
Victoria L, also Regina.
Beautiful things. Look, isn't that sweet? Here's a little pink bow. She was obviously a brunette. Fantastic.
Ja, auch mit der kleinen rosa Schleife hier. Offenbar war sie brünett.
Offenbar. Das finde ich fantastisch.
1861. Edward causes a public scandal at his military school. Colleagues have prepared a special treat for him, an actress hidden in his bed. He's greatly amused. Albert arrives and calls him to account. Albert returns home exhausted and feverish. Typhoid. His body weakened by overwork, Albert dies in Windsor shortly before Christmas. In Victoria's eyes, her son Edward is responsible for his father's death. On the day of his funeral, the British people begin to realise what they've lost in Albert. Now he is idolised and worshipped in an almost romantic manner. Victoria is unable to cope with her loss. From this day on until her death 40 years later, she will only wear widow's weeds. Balmoral in Scotland. Every year in the early summer, the Queen is greeted here with a parade by the Royal Guards. British tradition at its best. Balmoral is the site of the royal family's summer holiday, a tradition started by Queen Victoria over 100 years ago.
Guard of Honour! Royal salute! Present! Up!
In the years after Albert's death, Victoria spends more and more time in the seclusion of the Scottish Highlands, far away from London and far away from politics, year after year after year. Here in the foggy mountains, she'd spent her holidays with Albert, enjoying extensive picnics or walks with the family. Balmoral. This castle was also designed by Albert himself. After his death, there is nothing but sad silence in the corridors. Victoria can't bear any noise. Even her children have to be quiet. All pleasures are prohibited. Laughing is forbidden in her presence. She mourns Albert in the same passionate way as she loved him.
She sort of went into an orgy of grief and shut herself away. I mean, I think she always mourned for Albert. Everything was put out, his nightwear and his shaving water, and everything was put out as though he was still living there.
When Albert died, Queen Victoria's mourning was deep and genuine. He was the great love of her life. He was her life, and he was her most trusted advisor. She remained out of the public eye for many years, and when she emerged, she appeared in a black dress, and the only occasion on which she emerged was the dedication of another Albert memorial somewhere.
Victoria even takes the trouble to go to Coburg when a statue of Albert is erected on the marketplace. In London, she covers him with gold. There is another memorial for Albert at Balmoral, but sometimes the memories there are overwhelming. When Victoria wants to be on her own, she seeks the seclusion of the widow's house, accompanied by no more than 2 servants. One of them is her gillie, John Brown. He is to play an increasing and vital role in her private life.
At that stage in her life, I think she was rather selfish, because she should have thought of her children and the help that they needed, and not only her children, but the country. So I would have said, you know, for sort of 10 or 15 years of her life, she was extraordinarily selfish.
Victoria considers suicide. She fears losing her mind. There are rumours in the press about séances, though without any proof. On the Isle of Wight, Albert was not only responsible for a fine house, he also rebuilt a church, Whippingham, a special entrance for the Queen. 25 years after Albert's death, Victoria's daughter Beatrice celebrates her wedding at Whippingham Church. As she is the baby of the family, it was thought she would remain unmarried and stay with her mother. We know from the Queen's diaries how much she envied her daughter her happy partnership. Her presence makes the wedding more like a funeral. Bright colours are allowed for only a few hours. After dusk, everything has to return to the obligatory black. In London, the Queen, who has simply disappeared, is causing increasing displeasure. Her popularity suffers badly. And in Parliament, the question of the usefulness of a constitutional monarchy is discussed openly.
The public got fed up with it because there was a certain amount of Republican revival at that time. Many people thought that what was the use of having a queen if she never appeared?
All this doesn't seem to bother Victoria. She summons her ministers to Osborne House or to Scotland to report. Otherwise, she just stays away. Scotland, far away from the capital. The Scots are very special people with traditions which can be rather strange to outsiders. Victoria admires their down-to-earth, direct attitude highly, and they're stubborn, as she is herself. A simple Scotsman is to lure Victoria out of her seclusion, her gillie, John Brown.
When she was in mourning in the early years, it was John Brown who did a lot to snap her out of it, to understand, to make her come out of her depression. He got her out, particularly in Scotland, riding.
When out riding, they enjoy visiting the Lochnagar whisky distillery. They both appreciate a wee sip of the local specialities. John Brown, the gillie, takes care of his queen, much to the anger of the other servants. This photograph shows the royal household, together with the Queen's surgeon, Dr. Reed, who knows many of her secrets. Victoria's family can't cope with Brown. Gossip about an unseemly relationship starts when they both retire to the widow's house to spend a few nights there.
And there was a great friendship, affectionate friendship, and a certain intimacy between them.
Nobody can tell how intimate their relationship really was. Amazingly, John Brown's name never occurs in the Queen's diaries. But thanks to John Brown, Victoria reappears in public, a process that took many years. She finally begins to take an active part in politics again, to a higher degree than before. The country has a new Prime Minister who isn't expected to live up to Victoria's high principles. Benjamin Disraeli is a poet and a brilliant master of rhetoric with heavy debts. In a gallant way, he knows how to flatter Victoria. The Queen is absolutely taken by him. His opponent Gladstone has no luck with Victoria, even though he tries to emulate Albert's ideals. He is incapable of flattering the Queen. Gladstone wants to improve living conditions in Britain. Disraeli prefers to conquer new dominions for the Empire. The British Empire is growing. After only a few years, it embraces a fifth of the world's population and a quarter of the planet. Britain's wealth is founded in the colonies. Natural resources and human labour are declared to be British property. Hong Kong, Australia, the Suez Canal. Very soon, the British feel at home everywhere. In the Crown Colony of Hong Kong, cricket is to become a favourite sport. And the horse racing at Happy Valley is a society meeting place even today. The poshest district of Hong Kong is still called Victoria.
We did not see empire as a money box to take gold out of in the way that the Spanish or the Portuguese had, but rather to export our way of life. Let's look, I mean, our transport systems, our bureaucracy, our government, and create a new market for British goods. We, with this empire, however much we produced in this country, we would never be able to run out of markets.
These markets are defended with great resilience by the British Empire. But British people are not welcome everywhere. There is more and more resistance in the colonies. several revolts are brutally put down.
Victoria's reign has often been described as a reign of peace, but that's not the truth. There were about 200 conflicts or wars in the colonies, and the most brutal one maybe being the mutiny of 1857 in India.
2 opium wars break China's self-confidence. There are wars in Afghanistan, Zululand, and against the Boers. Armed conflicts are used to uphold or enlarge the empire. The world's first concentration camp is built by the British during the Boer War. Outside Europe, the word Victorian basically means war. Victoria gets a guilty conscience. In her diary, she requires that native and coloured races should be treated as brothers and not, as Englishmen too often do, fit only to be crushed and shot down. Victoria tries to learn Hindustani and employs Indian servants who become her close confidants, much to the dislike of her British household.
She took great trouble to defend people in her own household, whether they were Indian or African, because in those days, the rest of the people in her household were very, like this, very always putting down the servants and others who were from foreign countries. Queen Victoria was a very fair-minded person. She was very modern in this regard.
In 1876, Victoria is proclaimed Empress of India. This title hadn't existed before and was invented by her clever Prime Minister Disraeli in order to flatter his queen and to underline Britain's power. He is knighted by a grateful Victoria and later becomes Lord Beaconsfield. In the second half of the 19th century, there is competition for Britain. Other countries are beginning to industrialize their economies as well. The most successful is the German steel industry, Britain's new rival. The situation gets dangerous when Prussia takes power in Germany. In 1870, the German Confederation attacks France. The French can't withstand for long. Napoleon III is defeated, a humiliation which will remain long in the national memory of France. Germany is also losing its credit in England.
In those days, one thought of Germany with the philosophers, one thought of Nietzsche, one thought of Goethe. But little by little, Germany became more military-minded, more bellicose.
Because of her pro-German attitude, Victoria becomes more and more of an outsider. When the King of Prussia is proclaimed German Emperor in Versailles after the victory over France, Germany ceases to be a loose federation of small kingdoms. It has become an empire and a possible rival for Britain. Nevertheless, Victoria is well prepared. The heir apparent in Berlin is already a member of her family, her son-in-law. With the help of her daughter Vicky, she hopes to gain influence at the Prussian court. Several times a year, Vicky's family is invited to spend their holidays at Osborne House, and they gladly accept. Now the rooms where Victoria's own children grew up are occupied by her grandchildren. Even Albert's adventure playground with trenches, children's fort and cannon is reactivated. Here her grandchildren play together, practicing war. Her first grandson is the centre of Victoria's attention, the child of her favourite daughter. William II, seen here on the front seat as a child, admires his grandmother, but he is anything but easygoing. The English part of the family dislikes him.
He was tricky. He was arrogant, he was opinionated, and he was really made life very difficult for her.
Sooner than expected, William is called to duty when his father unexpectedly dies of cancer. The young emperor wants to imitate his grandmother, exploring the wide world with a strong fleet. In German shipyards, armour plating is welded together to construct mighty battleships. William's ever larger fleet is making Britain's admirals nervous. The dangerous game is still under Victoria's control, but for how long?
In the later reign of Queen Victoria, Germany and Great Britain more and more became rivals. That is due to the fact that since 1871, Britain and the other European nations had to deal with a united Germany, which on the international scene sometimes behaved like a parvenu and became more and more powerful.
For a long time, Victoria refuses to recognise the changes in Germany. For her, it is still Albert's land, an idyllic duchy called Coburg, with lovely hills and forests, and with people as simple and friendly as in Scotland or on the Isle of Wight. Memories of Albert are everywhere. If she wasn't to live in England, she writes in her diary, she would want to live at Rosenau. The place of her late husband's birth is very dear to her. But a wind of change is blowing from Berlin, which can also be felt in Coburg. Here, Albert's brother, dressed in the Prussian style with spiked helmet. Great efforts are made to keep the image of one big happy family. All of Europe's royalty gathers at a Coburg wedding. On the stairs of a Coburg conservatory, this well-known photograph of Victoria with the Russian Tsar, the German Kaiser, and the British heir apparent Edward VII is taken. Victoria has got two problem children. William causes political trouble, and Edward is nothing but a useless roue in her opinion.
And so, in a way, the difficult relationship between Britain and Germany continued right through and built up the momentum right until the First World War.
When the First World War breaks out, neither the Germans nor the British are unhappy about it. Both sides enter it with loud hurrahs. But just a few weeks later, the new dimension of this conflict becomes evident. It isn't a local, limited and honourable comparison of strength. The question now is complete victory or complete defeat, without honour and full of hatred. These feelings lead the British royals to abandon their German family name, Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. From now on, they choose to be known as Windsor, after their ancestral seat. All contact to the German relatives ceases. This break is still felt today. Prince Andreas and his daughter Princess Stephanie have never met the Queen personally.
So after the two wars, the relationship between the families were at a 0 point, which one can understand. It was a very bad situation for two wars to go over and fighting on two different sides. But I do think now that slowly these links, or let's say these connections, are now coming closer again.
Many of Victoria's achievements are already gambled away in the next generation. The question remains, why couldn't the family avoid this war?
The start of the First World War is such a mysterious thing that it's very difficult to know what could have been done to prevent it. It's as if the whole of that world had decided to commit suicide at once. I think Queen Victoria might have been in the position to prevent it. I don't think perhaps that King Edward VII would have been able to.
1897, the Diamond Jubilee, a celebration for the Queen with the longest reign in history. Queen Victoria is at the height of her popularity. For most of her subjects, she's become a monument in her own lifetime, almost immortal. So far, she's outlived two of her children and several grandchildren. Her reputation is beyond compare, her name already a symbol for an entire epoch. And her myth lives on today. Victoria is a favourite with biographers. Prince Andreas is hosting a reading at Schloss Kallenberg, another new biography of the Queen. According to the editor, there is nowhere in Germany more suitable for this book presentation, and Prince Andreas has invited the author and some of the neighbouring aristocracy.
My perception of Queen Victoria changed because at the beginning of my research I imagined her to be a queen who was more remote from daily events. I found out that she was very much interested in what was going on even in her older days.
At the end of her life, Victoria changes colour again. No more black, but white. This is how she wants to die and how she wants to be buried. She dictates her will, which will be carried out by her private surgeon. Victoria feels that the end is coming.
In the morning, the Kaiser wanted to see Queen Victoria.
He arrived uninvited to Osborne.
The rest of the family were against him seeing her.
And Queen Victoria, to be absolutely fair, was very pleased to see him. He was, after all, her first grandchild.
Well, here we are in Queen Victoria's bedroom, and it was in this room on the 22nd of January 1901 that the Queen died, surrounded by her immense family.
All the family were called in, and all her children were arranged round the bed.
At the head of her bed was her son Edward VII, who was to be the new king, and the German Kaiser, Wilhelm II.
And he was propping her up with his right arm. And on the other side of the bed, Sir James, feeling her pulse. And she kept turning to him and saying, "Sir James, I'm very ill. I'm very ill." And then she suddenly looked up at the picture of the entombment of Christ, and then died.
The parting shot really are these huge iron gates which were put up after Queen Victoria's death by Edward VII to close these apartments off for 50 years. And it wasn't, in fact, until the present reign in 1954 that these private apartments were opened to the public for the first time.
Victoria took many of her secrets to the grave, but one of her perhaps most intimate secrets is now coming to light. While she was on her deathbed, her private surgeon, Dr. James Reed, kept a diary. Third-generation descendants of Reed have opened his manuscript to the public. A sensation, and not only for researchers. Reed was in charge of carrying out the Queen's last will. Before the coffin was closed and brought to London, Dr. Reed asked the royal family to leave the room. He followed Victoria's orders. Did she want to avoid witnesses? The name Brown appears.
"I wish to be buried in a white silk or cashmere dress, with a cap and white veil over my face."
On 15 pages written in 1897, the Queen stipulated what was to be included in her coffin. In one hand, a keepsake of Albert. In the other, personal items owned by her Scottish servant Brown, a lock of hair, a photograph, his pocket watch, and his mother's wedding ring. She writes about Brown, "He was more dear to me than anyone." Today, we know why Victoria's diaries fail to mention John Brown. At the end of her life, she'd given orders that important parts of her records should be removed. Victoria's last secretary destroyed the papers.
daughter, Princess Beatrice, for the last few years of Queen Victoria's life was her private secretary, and that she undertook to burn a lot more than I think she need have done, and a lot more than she was requested to burn.
Beatrice does far more than just burn the diaries. In her mother's name, she rewrites the destroyed parts. Victoria's diaries are to a great extent forgeries.
I hadn't realized how difficult she was, how emotional, how irrational, and yet how human and how forgiving she could be.
I think the trouble today is that people don't give themselves enough time to think what were her achievements.
She appeared to be very dumpy and dowdy and frumpy, but in fact she had a great aura.
I saw the other day a picture of her with her laughing in a coach, so I think she was not always that stern as the way she seems to be for the people.
In contrast to all our beliefs, all the myth about Victoria, she was interested in politics, she gave advice to her prime ministers, and she became real angry when this advice was not heeded.
When she came to the throne, the standing of the British monarchy was at a very low ebb. But when she died more than 60 years later, her status and legend were beyond that of any other monarch in the world.
Last pictures of a great queen. The photographer on the Isle of Wight takes one last photo in her memory.
This is really just a case of this funeral which came down Victoria Avenue with thousands and thousands and thousands of people there. And it shows them carrying the coffin just before it went on board the Alberta.
She is accompanied by soldiers of the Queen's Guards in dress uniform on her last journey through the country. Thousands upon thousands of people line the way from Osborne House to the mausoleum at Windsor. For the last time, side by side, the German Kaiser and the new British King. William and Edward failed to take the opportunity of reconciliation at Victoria's grave. I will be good. Those were her words when, as a child, she learned that she would one day become queen. She wrote the same words in her diary following her coronation. It was a motto she lived up to.